The stage lights of America's Got Talent burned brighter than he had imagined. They weren't warm like sunlight, they were sharp, almost interrogating, as if demanding proof that he deserved to stand there. From where he stood, the audience blurred into a sea of faces, thousands of people all waiting, all watching, all ready to decide who he was in the next few seconds. His name echoed faintly in his head, spoken by the announcer moments earlier, but it already felt distant, unimportant. What mattered was the question that followed, the one that always came. So, what will you be singing tonight? He swallowed. An Elvis Presley song. For half a heartbeat there was nothing, then came the laughter. Not cruel, not loud enough to be called mocking, but unmistakable. A ripple, a wave, the kind of laughter that carries assumptions. We've seen this before. This won't end well. A few audience members exchanged knowing looks. Someone near the front shook their head with a small, amused smile. Even one of the judges raised an eyebrow, not unkindly, but with clear skepticism. Elvis, of all the artists in the world, he had chosen Elvis. His shoulders tensed, though he tried to keep them square. Inside, his chest tightened like a knot pulled too fast. He had known this might happen. He had imagined it on the long bus rides here, rehearsed it in the quiet moments before sleep. Still, knowing didn't make it easier. Elvis songs were legends, sacred ground, and legends invited comparison. The laughter faded, but the judgment remained, hanging in the air like static before a storm. He forced a small smile, the kind people wear when they don't want others to see fear. His hands, resting at his sides, trembled just enough that he curled his fingers into his palms. He pressed his thumb against the edge of his ring, a cheap silver band he'd owned for years. It grounded him, reminded him where he came from. From a small town no one on this stage had ever heard of. From mornings that began before sunrise. From jobs that paid just enough to survive, never enough to dream. This stage felt unreal, like stepping into someone else's life. He could almost hear his own thoughts whispering doubts. You don't belong here. They're already laughing. You should have chosen something safer. He glanced toward the judges' table. Their expressions varied, curious, cautious, polite, but none inspired confidence. They had seen thousands of hopefuls, thousands of voices, thousands of people who believed this moment would change everything. Most of them were wrong. The crowd shifted in their seats, restless now, ready to move on. Laughter had a way of shrinking a person, turning them small. For a moment, he felt smaller than he ever had, smaller than the kid who used to sing quietly while sweeping floors, smaller than the man who practiced alone after long workdays afraid neighbors would hear and judge. The host gave a gentle nod. The unspoken message was clear: go on. He stepped forward, just half a pace. The movement felt heavy, like walking against wind. He could leave, right now, apologize, say he'd made a mistake. No one would stop him, no one would blame him. But then something steadied him. Not confidence, he didn't have that. Not pride, he'd never had much of that either. It was memory. A kitchen years ago. A radio perched on a windowsill, crackling with an old Elvis song. A woman humming along, tired but smiling, turning everyday work into something lighter, turning struggle into music. That memory wrapped around him now like armor. He lifted his chin. The laughter had tried to define him in seconds. To reduce him to a stereotype, to an expectation already written. But he knew something they didn't. He wasn't here because he thought he could outshine a legend. He was here because sometimes, choosing the familiar is an act of courage. The room quieted again, though not with reverence, more like curiosity mixed with doubt, the kind of silence that waits for failure. He took a slow breath, in, out. Whatever happened next, this was his moment, not the judges, not the audiences. And as the music cue hovered just seconds away, one truth settled deep in his chest: they might laugh at his choice. But they hadn't yet heard his heart. The first note was coming. Before the music could begin, one of the judges leaned forward slightly, pen poised above the desk. It was a simple gesture, almost casual, but it carried weight. Why Elvis? The judge asked. The question landed heavier than expected. He hadn't prepared an answer meant for television. He hadn't practiced a speech in the mirror or crafted a story designed to win sympathy. Truth didn't usually need rehearsing, yet now, standing beneath the lights, it felt fragile, like something that could shatter if handled carelessly. He cleared his throat. For me, he began, then stopped. His voice sounded smaller than it had in his head. He tried again, slower. For me, Elvis isn't about being flashy, it's about home. The audience shifted, surprised by the gentleness of his tone. This wasn't the bold confidence they expected from someone choosing such an iconic artist. It was quieter, more personal. He took a breath and let the words come the way they always did, unpolished but honest. My mom loved Elvis, he said. Not because he was famous, because his songs made hard days feel lighter. The room softened, just slightly. He stared past the judges, past the cameras, as if looking through time instead of space. The stage dissolved, replaced by memories he carried everywhere. My mom cleaned houses, he continued, sometimes 3 in a day. Big houses that weren't ours. He smiled faintly. She'd turn the radio up while she worked. Elvis would be playing, and she'd sing along like the house belonged to her. A ripple of recognition passed through the audience. Many knew that kind of work, that kind of exhaustion, that small act of reclaiming joy. She used to tell me, he said, that music was the one thing no one could take away from you. Doesn't matter how tired you are. Doesn't matter how little you have. His hands moved now as he spoke, unconsciously tracing the rhythm of the past. The nervous tremble faded, replaced by something steadier. When I was a kid, I didn't understand why she loved those songs so much, he admitted. I thought they were old, outdated. A soft chuckle escaped him. I wanted something new. Something louder. A few smiles appeared in the crowd. But then, he said quietly, I grew up. The words settled deeper than he intended. She got sick a few years ago. Couldn't work anymore. Some days all she could do was sit by the window. His voice wavered for the first time, just barely. He paused, not to create drama, but because memory demanded respect. And on those days, he said, I'd play Elvis for her, same songs she used to sing while cleaning, and she'd close her eyes and smile, like she was back in those houses, like she was strong again. One of the judges shifted in their seat, another lowered their pen. The laughter from earlier felt distant now, almost embarrassing in hindsight. She passed away last year, he continued. The words came out steadier than expected. Grief had a way of smoothing itself with time, not disappearing, but settling. I didn't have much to give her in the end, no big gifts, no miracles. He glanced down at the stage floor, then back up. But I sang to her, he said, every night, even when my voice cracked, even when I was scared the neighbors would hear. A hush fell over the theater. This wasn't a backstory designed to impress. It was the kind of truth people recognized in their own lives, the quiet love, the regret of not being able to do more, the hope that presence was enough. She used to tell me, he added softly, that if I ever got scared, I should sing anyway. That fear gets smaller when you let the song out. He smiled then, not for the judges, not for the cameras, but for her. So I'm singing Elvis tonight, he said, because this song carried her through her hardest days, and if it can carry even one person here tonight, then it's worth it. For a moment, no one reacted. Then something changed. The skepticism that had filled the room earlier, quiet, but sharp, began to dissolve. It didn't turn into applause yet. Instead it turned into something more powerful. Understanding. The judges exchanged glances, their expressions no longer guarded. One nodded slowly, as if recognizing a truth they hadn't expected to hear. The audience sat still, drawn into a shared memory that wasn't theirs, but felt like it could have been. He hadn't sung a note yet, and already, the room was listening. The judge nearest the center leaned back, then smiled gently. Whenever you're ready, they said. He closed his eyes for just a second, not to prepare for the song, but to thank the reason he was brave enough to stand there. The music was about to begin. The first note hadn't been sung yet, but the silence already felt different. It was no longer the kind that waits for failure. It was the kind that leans in. The band stood ready, hands hovering, eyes flicking between sheet music and the man at center stage. The lights softened slightly, losing their sharp glare, settling into a warm glow that wrapped around him like a quiet invitation. He adjusted the microphone once, just a small movement, but even that sound echoed through the room, reminding him how exposed he was. He took a breath, not a singer's breath, a human one, the kind you take before stepping into cold water. The kind you take when you're about to tell the truth. The opening chord drifted through the theater, familiar and gentle, an Elvis song known by generations, played at weddings, at funerals, in cars on long highways where memories traveled beside you. The kind of song people thought they already knew. He opened his eyes, and then he sang. The first note was soft, almost hesitant. It didn't demand attention, it asked for permission. Something unexpected happened. No one shifted in their seat, no one whispered, no one laughed. The note hung in the air, fragile but steady, carrying more than melody. It carried restraint, respect, a deep understanding that this song wasn't meant to be shown off. It was meant to be shared. His voice wasn't polished, it didn't sparkle or soar right away. Instead it sounded lived in, like an old letter read too many times but never thrown away. There were edges to it, small cracks where life had pressed too hard, and those imperfections made people listen harder, not less. A woman in the audience lowered her phone. A man crossed his arms, then slowly let them fall. At the judge's table, pens stopped moving. He sang the first line as if he were standing in that small kitchen again, radio humming, his mother's voice blending with Elvis's. The stage dissolved, the cameras vanished. There was only the song and the space it created, wide enough for everyone to step into. With each word, his shoulders relaxed. The tension that had gripped him earlier loosened its hold. He wasn't trying to prove anything now. He wasn't trying to win. He was remembering. The second line came stronger, not louder, but fuller, as if confidence had quietly taken a seat in his chest, whispering, "You're allowed to be here." The audience felt it before they understood it. This wasn't nostalgia for show. This was reverence. A judge leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. Their expression changed, not to a, "not yet," but to recognition. The look people get when something unexpectedly familiar taps them on the shoulder. The song moved forward, steady as a heartbeat, and with it, the room began to breathe together. Inhale, exhale, 1,000 strangers, synchronized by a voice that had almost been dismissed. Then came the moment he feared most, a sustained note, one that required control, one he had practiced alone, late at night, stopping and starting until frustration set in, one that had cracked more times than he cared to admit. He reached it, and his voice wavered, just for a second, a crack loud, not dramatic but unmistakable. His eyes flickered open wider. Panic brushed against his ribs, he felt heat rush to his face. Here it is, his mind whispered. This is where they remember why they laughed. The band softened instinctively, sensing the shift. He swallowed and pushed forward, but his voice didn't respond the way he wanted. It thinned, frayed at the edges, the weight of memory pressing too hard all at once. The image of his mother, smiling through pain, rose too close, too fast. He stopped singing. The pause was unplanned, unscripted, dangerous. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. He lowered his gaze, embarrassed, ashamed that emotion had caught him off guard. This was television. Millions would watch. Mistakes were magnified here. His grip tightened around the microphone, and then something extraordinary happened. From somewhere in the audience, a soft clap echoed. One beat, then another, not loud, not mocking, encouraging. Another joined in, then another, not a roar, just a gentle rhythm. A collective gesture that said, "We're still with you." He looked up stunned. Faces met his gaze, not impatient, not disappointed, but kind strangers, nodding, smiling, offering grace without asking for anything in return. At the judges' table, one of them smiled and gave a small, steady nod. No pressure, no judgment. Take your time. His chest tightened again, but this time not with fear, with gratitude. He closed his eyes, drew a deeper breath and began again, right where he had left off. The note returned, imperfect but braver for having almost broken. And this time, it carried something new, trust. As the song reached its middle, his voice found a balance between strength and vulnerability. He wasn't hiding the cracks anymore. He let them be part of the sound, part of the story. The audience felt it shift. This wasn't just a performance now. It was a shared moment of resilience, of being seen and accepted in weakness. A judge wiped at their eyes, surprised by the wetness there. Someone in the back row whispered, "Wow," without realizing they'd spoken. The final lines approached, and with them, a quiet power settled over the room. He sang them not upward, not outward, but inward, as if offering the song back to the place it came from. When the last note faded, it didn't disappear immediately. It lingered. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of memories people hadn't expected to feel. Full of gratitude for a moment that reminded them what music was meant to do, not impress but connect. He stood there, breathing hard, eyes still closed, unaware of how completely the room had changed. The laughter was gone. In its place was something far more powerful, respect, and the realization, shared by everyone in that theater, that they had just witnessed more than a song. They had witnessed courage finding its voice. For a brief moment after the final note faded, he remained completely still. The microphone trembled slightly in his hand, not from fear now, but from the aftershock of everything he had just let out. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, as if his body was still catching up to his courage. The silence in the theater stretched, heavy but tender, like the pause after a prayer. Then the applause began. Not all at once, not explosive. It started softly, the way kindness often does. A few claps here and there, scattered like raindrops on pavement. But each one carried intention, not celebration, recognition. As if the audience wasn't applauding the performance, but the honesty behind it. The sound grew, building gradually until it filled the room. He looked up, blinking, almost unsure whether the reaction was real. Rows of people were on their feet now, not rushing, not shouting, standing slowly, deliberately, as if they wanted to honor the moment instead of overwhelm it. His throat tightened again. He hadn't expected this. He had hoped not to embarrass himself, hoped not to fail. He had never imagined being met with something as gentle, and as powerful, as this. At the judges' table one of them stood as well, then another, a third followed, not because the rules demanded it, but because the moment did. The host watched quietly from the side, understanding that stepping in too soon would break something fragile and sacred. He pressed the microphone closer to his chest, unsure what to do with his hands, his emotions, the sudden warmth flooding through him. He nodded once, twice, small gestures of thanks he hoped the audience could feel. Then something unexpected happened again. One of the judges leaned forward and spoke, but not loudly. "Take your time," they said softly into the mic. Their voice wasn't for television. It was for him. The applause settled, but the room remained open, attentive. He hadn't been rushed forward into judgment. He hadn't been cut off by noise or spectacle. He had been given space. And that, he swallowed hard, eyes glistening now, and laughed quietly, almost embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he said, shaking his head. I didn't expect any of this." A gentle murmur passed through the audience. Another judge smiled. "You don't need to apologize," they said. "This is your moment." He took a breath and nodded, grounding himself again. He felt suddenly exposed, not because of nerves but because compassion had stripped away his armor. It's easier to brace for criticism than it is to accept kindness. The first judge spoke again. You know, they said, when you told us you were singing Elvis, people laughed. I'll admit, I was skeptical too. A few audience members nodded, some smiling sheepishly. But then, the judge continued, you reminded us why these songs last, not because they're perfect, but because they carry people through life. Another judge chimed in, voice thick with emotion. There was a moment, they said, when your voice cracked, and instead of pulling away you stayed. That takes courage, and the audience met you there. The judge gestured toward the crowd, who responded with warm applause, not loud this time, but affirming. He listened, stunned. This wasn't critique, this wasn't performance analysis, this was acknowledgement of something human. He thought of all the times he had been invisible, all the rooms he'd worked in where no one noticed him, all the nights he sang to an empty kitchen, believing the sound disappeared as soon as it left his mouth. Here, it hadn't disappeared, it had been held. Another judge leaned closer, eyes kind. I want to say something to you, they said. You came on this stage carrying grief, and instead of hiding it, you shared it. That gave everyone here permission to feel something real. The audience responded with a murmur of agreement. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes openly, now unashamed. He nodded slowly, unable to speak yet. He wasn't sure words would survive his throat. Then the judge added, and I hope you know, you didn't just sing for your mother tonight. You sang for a lot of people who needed that reminder. That was it. Tears welled over, spilling before he could stop them. He turned slightly away, embarrassed again, but the audience didn't look away. They leaned in, offering the same patience they had given him mid-song. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, laughing softly at himself. She would have loved this, he said, voice breaking. She used to say kindness is louder than talent. A hush followed those words. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. The host finally stepped forward, careful not to rush. This, they said, gesturing around the room, is why this stage exists. What the judges nodded. The crowd applauded again, stronger now, fuller. This wasn't about advancing to the next round yet. This was about recognizing something rare, a moment where generosity, of spirit, of patience, of empathy, had transformed a simple audition into a shared experience. He stood taller now, not because he had won anything, but because he felt seen, held, respected, and as the applause washed over him, one truth became clear: kindness had carried him through the hardest part of the song, and now, it was carrying him forward. The final judgment still waited, but something far more important had already been given. Grace. When the applause finally began to fade, it didn't disappear all at once. It softened like waves pulling gently back from shore, leaving behind something deeper than sound. The theater settled into a quiet that felt earned, a silence shaped not by uncertainty, but by shared understanding. He stood at center stage, shoulders relaxed now, hands steady, breathing slower. The weight that had pressed on his chest when he first walked out was gone. In its place was something unfamiliar, something light, peace. The judges looked at one another, not to decide, but to acknowledge what they had all felt. This wasn't just about whether the performance had been good enough. It was about what had happened in the room. Something that couldn't be measured, replayed, or reduced to a score. One of the judges spoke first, voice calm, deliberate. There are moments on this stage, they said, that remind us why music matters. Not because it impresses us, but because it connects us. The audience nodded, quiet but engaged, as if no one wanted to break the fragile atmosphere by clapping too soon. You walked out here, the judge continued, and people laughed, not out of cruelty, but out of assumption. We assumed we knew your story before you told it. A murmur rippled through the crowd, recognition, even remorse. And then, the judge said, you gave us a gift, you asked us to listen. He felt his throat tighten again, but this time the emotion didn't overwhelm him, it steadied him, anchored him. Another judge leaned forward, hands folded. You know, they said gently, this competition is full of big voices and big moments. But sometimes the bravest thing isn't being loud, it's being honest. A soft applause followed, not for the judge, but for the truth of the statement. The third judge smiled, eyes warm. I want to talk about that silence, they said. After you finished singing, the room grew even quieter, as if everyone was being invited back into that moment. That wasn't confusion, the judge continued. That was respect. People didn't know how to respond right away because what you shared didn't feel like entertainment. It felt like something personal. The audience responded with a low hum of agreement. He listened, heart full, thinking about how different this felt from the life he knew. In his world, silence usually meant indifference. It meant being overlooked, being unheard. But this silence meant everything. The host stepped in again, voice gentle. So, they said, smiling at him, what do you think your mom would say if she were here right now? The question caught him off guard. He laughed quietly, a sound layered with emotion. She'd probably tell me to stand up straighter, he said, adjusting his posture slightly. The audience chuckled warmly. Then he grew serious. But she'd also say, see, you were never too small, you just needed the right room. The words settled deep, echoing through the theater like a truth many had waited their whole lives to hear. A judge nodded slowly. I think a lot of people needed that reminder tonight, they said. The moment for decisions arrived, but even that felt different now. Less like judgment, more like affirmation. Yes, said the first judge smiling without hesitation. Yes, said the second, voice firm but kind. The third judge paused not for drama, but for meaning. This, they said, is an easy yes. The crowd erupted, not with wild screams but with joy, with release. People stood clapping, cheering, hugging strangers beside them. Some wiped tears from their faces unashamed. He covered his mouth with one hand, overwhelmed. Tears flowed freely now, but he didn't try to hide them. He had learned something powerful tonight. Vulnerability didn't weaken him, it invited connection. The host handed him the microphone one last time. Any final words, they asked. He looked out at the audience, at people who had laughed, then listened, then lifted him. I just want to say this, he began. If you ever feel like your voice doesn't matter, if you think people have already decided who you are, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Speak anyway, show up anyway. Applause swelled again, strong and heartfelt. Because sometimes, he added, all it takes is one moment of kindness and everything changes. As he walked off the stage, the lights dimmed behind him. But inside, something stayed bright. He hadn't just moved on to the next round. He had carried his mother's love into a room full of strangers, and watched it come back multiplied. And long after the cameras stopped rolling, long after the applause faded, one truth remained. They laughed at his choice, they listened to his heart, and in that silence between the notes, humanity found its voice again.